Good evening and welcome to the Book Club of California. Welcome to our live and online program titled Redemptive Dreams, Engaging Kevin Starr's California. And thank you for joining us in our club rooms here and online. Excuse me. My name is Ann Smith, and I'm a past president of the Book Club of California, which is why I'm standing up here tonight. There's about, I see 4 or 5 at least known past presidents present, and we welcome you all to the Book Club of California and our century-old tradition of gathering. For those of you who are new, the Book Club of California is a nonprofit member and donor-supported organization dedicated to preserving and promoting the history of the book and the book arts, oftentimes with a focus on literature and the history of California and the West. The Book Club of California publishes limited edition books, including 1 or 2. I don't quite remember how many by Kevin Starr. Just 1? I think so. I can't remember the name right now. And it publishes these limited edition books, 1, 2, or 3 a year. It publishes the Scholarly Journal and Keepsakes. It hosts a year-round series of exhibitions and programs like this one on topics including fine printing, design, typography, bookbinding, collecting, and much more about the book. If you're not a member, or if your membership has lapsed and you're interested in what we do, please consider rejoining. And membership dues are modest. The benefits are many. We simply can't do what we do without the support of our membership. So I encourage you to visit our website at bccbooks.org to join or donate to the book club. Now for tonight's program and our presenter, Redemptive Dreams. You know, I remember coming to California, and one of the first books I remember buying was a book by Kevin Starr called Land's End. And it was about typical San Francisco families. It was a novel, but it was kind of juicy. And I really enjoyed reading it and learning some of the past history, fictionalized or not, about San Francisco. And we've had so many books from that to Armistead Maupin to all kinds of other people writing about the people of San Francisco. And sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. Our presenter tonight is author and professor of sociology at University of California in Los Angeles, Jason Sexton. Jason S. Sexton is a theologian, social theorist, and cultural historian. That's quite a rap. I love it. And currently a lecturer in UCLA's sociology department and visiting research scholar at UCLA's Institute of the Environment and Sustainability. Before that, he served as interim Cal State University's Associate Dean of Academic Programs and is editor of UC Press's Boom, California. Taught at Cal State Fullerton and did a postdoc at Ridley Hall, Cambridge. He's the author of 8 books, or editor of 8 books, among which is Theology in California, Theological Refractions on California's Culture. Tonight, Jason will talk about author, storyteller, educator, historian, former book club member, and former California State Librarian, and I think San Francisco City and County Librarian, Kevin Starr, and his vision of California. It was a vision that played out particularly in Starr's 7-book series titled Americans and the California Dream. His book, Redemptive Dreams, Engaging Kevin Starr's California, offers Jason's critical engagement with Starr's vision of California. While Starr's multifaceted, polymathic vision of California offered a unique gaze, it often puzzled historians and other scholars. Historians in the contemporary school of crucial historiography often found Starr's narrative approach, seeking to tell the internal drama of the California story, which we like to read, to be less attuned to the most important work happening in the field. Our speaker will offer some interdisciplinary perspectives that highlight key features inherent in interdisciplinary theological reflection. Shall I say it again? Inherent in interdisciplinary theological reflection on place, and illuminate these diverse disciplinary discourses as they appear in Starr's articulation of the California dream. So I do apologize, but tonight we will not be able to take questions from our virtual audience. If those of you who are here, and if you have a question for our speaker, please note we should have some time at the end to take a few questions at the end of the presentation. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Jason S. Sexton. Thank you, Jason.
To be here. Well, it is a great pleasure to be here at the Book Club of California. Thank you to all of you for coming out tonight. Can you hear me okay? Great. And hello to friends on Zoom. Glad you can join us as well. And sorry about the questions, but would love to hear from you too. Light of what you hear. So again, thank you so much, Anne, for the beautiful introduction. It's a joy to be in this special place and a special audience. Thanks to Kevin Kosick as well for all this. And I'm looking forward to being also at the Book Club of California in the fall in Pasadena to continue talking about this book that we had so much fun doing, Redemptive Dreams. Now, I'd first like to start, I'm assuming that most of you, or at least some of you, knew Kevin. This is Kevin's town. This is Kevin's town. Now, you all have Kevin's stories. And so I think I would like to, I'd like to start with a little one of my own. The first time I contacted Kevin was early 2013. So just over 11 years ago. After several no reply emails to him, we had a small grant, and it was to get people together to talk about California, to get historians, sociologists, and theologians together to talk about California, and to address the question whether there is a, or is not a, how would we understand it, a theology of California. So we needed historians, we needed sociologists, and we needed theologians for that question. And the grant wasn't much, but some of the historians thought, you know, what if we contacted Kevin Starr to come talk to us? Would he come? So several no reply emails. See, and I'll just pick up the phone. Now, the problem was I lived in Cambridge at the time in England on a postdoc. So this is an 8-hour difference. And I figured, okay, I'm going to just call the guy. I remember the phones, he used to call phones. And I think it was maybe the 4th or 5th time. And I just every day stayed up late at night, 8 p.m., start calling, 9 p.m., keep calling. And he picked up the phone. Kevin Starr here. Of course. And I was shocked. He picked up the phone. I said, look, you don't know me. But I grew up in the Central Valley, in Tracy. I was a kid going to the Exploratorium, and and I don't know what you think about theology. Okay. Now, I said, I see a little bit of it rattling around in your books. You're just sort of telling the real story insofar as I can tell. But and let me just uh, uh, this is just introducing you to me. I'd love you to come talk to a group of historians, theologians, and sociologists about this. Some of the questions we have. And he says, "Now, where are you again?" So Ridley Hall, Cambridge. And he says, Ridley, the bishop, right? So Kevin, right away, not only does he have theology rattling around in his books, but he knows this 16th century Anglican bishop who was Bishop of London, right? Who was killed in Oxford Square, right across from Eagle and Child pub there. And so which put me in this place to realize that Kevin knew, we seem to know just about everything, which is to say that Kevin Starr cared about the particulars. He cared about church history. He cared about California history. He cared about where things came from. And those particulars mattered. I think about Michel Desserteau, and the everyday, nothing is wasted with Kevin. The details matter. And so I asked him, of course, would you come and talk to us at the Berkeley City Club, old Julian Morgan building? So, we have this small grant and I don't know what your fee is. We were nervous about that. And he says, no, I'll just come. Well, okay, would you have dinner with us? Maybe your wife too? Yes, we'll both come. I was able to settle and tell the colleagues that we got Kevin Starr to come to this. And come he did. He came to talk to us about California identity and theology, and that precipitated our first book that we did called Theology in California, with Kevin there. And of course, he did later on, so generous, helped me launch the book, Green Apple Books, in 2014. That was one of my favorites. Kevin agreed to come and to be in conversation with my co-editor, Fred Sanders, and me. He comes and climbs the stairs and it's there. I guess there's a dozen people there for our book talk, and Kevin, larger than life, and a dog is with us. And he came, and because that was a small group, I was able to really be candid in our conversation with Kevin. And I remember saying, Kevin, I don't know why you said this in one of your volumes about my hometown. You called it the dusty town of Tracy. The dusty town. And he immediately says, I'm very sorry about that. I'm very sorry about that. He says, in fact, it's in a flood zone. Which is also to say that, he knew the sort of the changes. I mean, it is where they pump the water. Of course, it's a sinking place. It is on the Delta, but, in this place, the early missionaries said it's an uninhabitable place. But which was interesting to see Kevin apologizing for saying things that mattered to a young scholar like myself. Ever learning, Kevin Starr, ever acknowledging the impact of words. I remember seeing him later at a talk at the LA Cathedral, where he was giving a talk on efforts to describe inclusion. He was also at a USC Catholic Writers Conference, and saw him again at a San Diego talk and several other times. And I remember Kevin just with this spectacular acts of generosity and kindness. I mean, Kevin was a magnet when he walked into the room. He was larger than life, and one who lived the dream. And I remember one of the last interactions I had with Kevin and Sheila just a few months before he died. We managed to get another grant to follow up our first book, and that grant would include not only additional engagements with California, but we wanted to especially focus on Kevin Starr's California, which ultimately results in this book. Kevin said, okay, you guys get together, you write your chapters, and I'll respond in the book. We had our first meeting set up at the Mechanics Institute just down the road. And of course, early 2017, Kevin died. We had the meeting anyway. And before this, I had some interaction with Kevin. And this, of course, is also what leads to this book. And I had this conversation with Kevin early on. the fall before he died, when I was editor of Boom, California, to ask him, how would you define California values? California values. And Kevin had said, well, define it this way. So it's better life, and sorry about the font here, better life for ordinary people. And then he said that that's summed up in 3 different principles. It said that it's life, the improvement of life, and the ability of ordinary people to achieve such improvement for themselves. Now, I asked them in response to that, because this had to do with early Californians, why do people come here? And I wonder if I could just see a raise of hands. How many of you are from California? Okay, so then it's maybe about a third that are not from California. Okay, raise your hand if you're not from California. Kevin Starr used to say, you probably know this, the best Californians, are those who choose to come here. Who choose to come here. And so, and not only is he acknowledging that this is part of California values, American values, but more so, was said by Stegner, but Kevin really is down to the details. Life, the improvement of life, and the ability of ordinary people to achieve such improvement for themselves. And I says, okay, so what are the threats to those values? So yeah, the threats are, now this is 2017, the threats are the growing divide, he said, between the very wealthy and the very poor. And Kevin grew up poor. Kevin grew up orphaned. Father leaves the family and mother is in a mental hospital during the time of the eugenics era, which means not just the trauma of having your mother and father away, but also growing up in an orphanage, where it said that this was an important positive experience. The sisters who cared for him really cared, but grew up poor nonetheless. And then in the Portrero housing projects, right, and had this experience of trauma. And so when he says that these are the threats, this growing divide between the very wealthy and the very poor, he goes on further to say, as well as the waning of the middle class, is expressed geographically in California by the global wealth of the coast from San Diego to Marin County, and the rapid socioeconomic fall off evident in certain interior regions. So this is important to Kevin, interpreting this place in very particular ways, which included, of course, as Anne had mentioned, he was a member of the Book Club of California and every other club he could be a part of. He believed in inclusion because he found himself included with of course, not only cared for, says he was raised by the city of San Francisco and the Portrero housing projects, and then got a scholarship to USF, and then, of course, was in the military, and then gets another scholarship to Harvard, all places. Beyond his wildest dreams in some ways. And then took a degree in library science at Berkeley. Never thought he'd be in these spaces, these venerable institutions. But he was included. Which I think gives Kevin a sense of not only having at one time wanted to be included, but then found himself included, which, and Kevin was never one to say that he didn't want to be somewhere. Kevin was happy to come if somebody calls him from 8 hours away and says, will you just come to dinner and talk to us about California? If he could, he would. Sort of like, Malcolm Margolin's talked about, when Kevin walked into a room, it's like everybody owed him a favor. Mm-hmm. And he didn't want any others, especially in California, to ever be excluded. And so this really then becomes the base of his astonishing generosity. If he could do it, he would. If Sheila told him to, he certainly would. I remember, and this will be my final story about Kevin before I get into what we do in the book, and I'll introduce you to some of our more academic efforts with the book. There's a story that Malcolm Margolin tells, and this was after the first Kevin Starr lecture at University of San Francisco. So this is fall 2017, and we're driving with Susan Moffat and Malcolm and me, and Malcolm is telling, and everybody's telling stories about Kevin. And Malcolm's got a lot. stories. And of course, the founder of Heyday, Malcolm, stated that every time he, and I recorded this when Malcolm was talking, I whipped out my phone because I wanted every word that Malcolm said and just verified it this afternoon. He stated that every time Kevin would see him, Kevin would say that Malcolm had written the best book of California ever written. The Ohlone Way, if you know it, about the early California dwellers. The best book. Now, we could debate whether is that in fact the best book ever read. But Kevin would say this, would introduce Malcolm as the best book of California ever written. And his work belonged, he would say, in the era of Hubert Howe Bancroft. And he called Malcolm saintly. Saintly. Not just with the rabbinical beard, of course, but saintly, always building him up. And Malcolm, running an independent publishing company is no walk in the park. And in fact, Malcolm goes on to say, Kevin would say, I wrote the best book of California, calling me saintly, even when my Uncle Bill, Malcolm says, was selling stolen overcoats. My Uncle Jack was a boxer. My father worked for a trucking company, and I had this bankrupt enterprise that I was barely keeping alive by scamming grant monies to try to keep the damn thing alive. And Kevin placed me in this role of greatness. Susan responds, yeah, people knew what Kevin was doing. He was lifting us up. He was inspiring us, sometimes in spite of who we are. So I think Malcolm highlights the generosity. And, as we get into what Kevin's done, of course, Kevin Starr attempted the most ambitious interpretive project of California ever given by a single author. The scale and scope of his 8-volume Americans in the California Dreams series, it's unmatched, and it will likely remain so for the foreseeable future, probably my lifetime. Along with Starr's many other published articles and volumes, ranging in not just the hundreds, but thousands of articles, including his columns with the San Francisco Examiner, sometimes 2 columns a week. The California Dreams series showcases his polymathic capability for centralizing central features, for dealing with big themes, as well as incredible problems that exist with the propitious golden dream, we might call it. That dream, as he's already described, of a better life, better humanity, better community. It depicts, I guess also a better future as well, right? In the dream, and which reflects Josiah Royce's higher provincialism, right? But that it doesn't depict the story as Kevin sought to tell it. It is his story, and now we're sort of coming to what. And nobody would have asked Kevin Starr, "What have you done for us lately?" Put the 8-volume set right on your desk and watch it stack up, and that will convince the director of the National to give Kevin really the Presidential Medal of Freedom. I mean, he has done a lot for us. And he identified this story of California that he sought to tell as an anthropological act. So he went on to masterfully set out to both locate and explicate, as Anne had mentioned, California's internal drama. Now, in our book, we sought to address the question of who Kevin Starr is among the disciplines, that is, among the arts and the humanities. A symphony was written reflecting Kevin's Dream series. We didn't really go in there. There's no music historians but yes, among the arts, the humanities, the sciences, and some have come into some critical conversation with Starr's work. It's of course been over 6 years since his untimely death, and of course we would have loved to have had another 10 years with Kevin. Going through COVID, California today, how he could have helped put things in context for us and shown us kind of who we are in light of our history. I think we are lacking in light of his loss, our loss of him. But of course, last year was the 50th anniversary of his first book, Americans in the California Dream, his doctorate out of Harvard, 1850 to 1915. And Starr remains, I believe, a figure whose work draws attention both from academic communities and the wider public. He towards the end of his life, gave several, as I've already mentioned, frequent lectures. He'd come along to really anywhere he was invited, which would draw not just significant crowds of scholars, but also students and politicians and the working class, resembling his own upbringing. He was often consulted and served as a subject for media interviews and articles about California throughout his life. And the first person to mention his death publicly, of course, was none other than former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. Of course, Gavin Newsom, when he was Lieutenant Governor, speaking of Starr's death right away, and Governor Schwarzenegger recently gave me a letter thanking me for this, not just this book, and endorsed it as well, but also for how much Kevin meant to him. Both, again, giving him context as well as advice, connecting things, which Kevin could do like no other. Yet as far as critical conversations go with the range of Starr's written corpus, so starting with the 8 volumes, but a lot more than that. I'll tell you more about that in just a minute. We come along to, in this book, Redemptive Dreams, try to break some new ground by analyzing Kevin's contribution as something of a public intellectual, public historian, on the move, not just librarian of the city of San Francisco, but then the state librarian, right? Seeing himself as really above everything, a servant of the people, a public servant, right? That knowledge is not meant to be holed up and cordoned up in the ivory towers of academia. Of course, his position was at University of Southern California, but it would be unleashed for the people. And so we come together to analyze his contribution as a public historian who was also a Catholic historian. I'm not a Catholic, but this is a significant part of his analysis of the place. And therefore, among other themes of the book, we incorporate the theological for critical analysis. Now, Starr did acknowledge, California's religious sensibilities. He knew that it was, this is a place where immigrants came, and, often when immigrants are moving around, if you're going to find your feet somewhere, you're going to do it often with your religious tradition. So he did, of course, set up to say how those features do exist here. And from the first volume, he acknowledged that he began his own very life as a Catholic and continued that same journey of faith. And later at Harvard in the 1960s, took up studying what he called religion as a social and cultural force under the guidance of Professor Alan Heimert, a preeminent historian of religion in colonial America. And I'm reflecting just briefly on the last 2 volumes of Kevin's, which had to do with Roman Catholicism in the Americas, right? Sort of coming back to reckon with his own, the troubling experience. We've even just seen this in this last week. The San Francisco diocese rocked again with scandals that deeply rattled Kevin while remaining a Catholic. And therefore, seeking to stay with, and in that sense, as it's been written elsewhere, not by Kevin in Kevin's term, but to stay with the troubles, to be where you are. Sheila Starr acknowledged that the 2 final volumes that Kevin gave, Continental Ambitions, Roman Catholics in North America, and then Continental Achievement, Roman Catholics in the United States. Sheila had mentioned that these 2 volumes remain Kevin's offering to the church that raised him and sustained him throughout his life. And yet, aside from what is found in these volumes, and really what remains unexplored in Kevin's early writings, should say that this includes not only 225 record cartons of papers that were given to the California State Library, 225, of which I just learned 2 weeks ago that 114 have been cataloged. So of those boxes, and yet, not only were the 225 record boxes given at Kevin's death to the State Library, 114 are cataloged, but 400 remain to be cataloged, which are boxes that were given from his time as state librarian. So there's a lot that Kevin has left us. And what we're interested in this book is particularly the theological dimensions, right? We can sort of look at the religious, but the theological dimensions that really help structure his vision, help to form the contours of what he will see, of course, famously not addressing the issues of the 60s in California, which Mike Davis says in the volume might have been sort of like almost like Joan Didion's revulsion at Los Angeles. It's just too much to take in. Now, you did deal with it in the single volume, but and you do get it in some of his columns, and yet, so here's what we do in the book. We're addressing Kevin Starr, okay, but not exclusively Kevin Starr, right? It's not a biography of Kevin. We're looking at his vision and how his vision of California has gone largely underanalyzed. I mean, often folks would say that, yes, it's the sunny side of life for Kevin Starr, right? As opposed to sort of Mike Davis's noir telling of the dark underbelly. And Kevin, of course, did have some of these, but always when he would analyze what he had, there would be the uplift towards the end. And it was that hope vision, which we want to understand, so where's this coming from? How he intimately understood various movements throughout California, right? Along with his own growing understanding of the place, from a dusty town to Tracy to, it's in a flood zone, right? Constantly reading, constantly learning, constantly revising, even though the books, of course, have to go when they're due to the publisher. Kevin Starr did intimately, I think, understand both of the movements, right? The difficulties as well as the moments of hope, along with his own growing understanding of his own place in the story. Accordingly, he sought to interpret it, I think, as the place that made his life what it was, and which makes our life what it is. Including the lives for Kevin of so many others, which is to say that California, not merely as a historical or even a socio-political matter, but an existential issue and a geographically loaded and phenomenological and therefore experienced reality. So as we get into understanding how we are locating locating Kevin here among the disciplines, we have a number of historians that are having a hard time, trying to understand Kevin Starr with his, and he said that he was often and admitted to be a bit light on theory. And a lot of historians who still exist, I think we might call these historians who are part of the so-called critical school of historiography, would often comment things like, or at least showcase attitudes. That's not the kind of history that we wish to do anymore. What Kevin was doing was maybe an old school approach that told stories. And yet, in the book, we have contributors like my colleague Russell Jung, a sociologist at San Francisco State, and Robert Chow Romero, who's written on early Chinese in Mexico, as well as on what he calls brown church and brown religion. And Amos Young, a leading scholar of Pentecostal Christianity, have come together in a beautiful essay, I think, that shows how the features of ethnic studies, both from Black and African-American studies and Chicano studies and Asian studies and Native studies, have found their various sub-disciplines, if you can call it that, or area disciplines, coming back to narrative, to retelling the stories from there are various perspectives that are there, which Kevin was doing all along. All along. So sort of, here you have the critical, so-called critical school of historiography kind of washing over Kevin. And one of the questions that we had at the American Historical Association a couple weeks ago, also in San Francisco, and we had a panel on this, the question was raised about, what do we, by a historian, or a well-known historian, about where do we locate Kevin? What is his legacy? And one of our panelists, who's an author of the book, Peter Richardson, actually, who wrote about Kevin in the late 70s, Kevin's spat with Harvey Milk, and kind of where that's at. And of course, what I take is Kevin's shift, maybe a spiritual shift Mike Davis talks about in the book, and Kevin about the same time. Because of course, Milk and Moscone are both assassinated. What's happening in this fight for what San Francisco will be? And Kevin has this part in his column where he tells Milk's responding to Milk, and then Milk's most famous speech, he calls out Kevin and says, who's that bigot writing in the Examiner? And Kevin is also getting ready for a supervisor run and says, we don't want those values in San Francisco. And something changes to the point where just a couple of years later, Kevin, also in the same San Francisco Examiner columns that he's holding down, writes 2 columns back to back, celebrating the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence coming out of San Francisco. Inclusive. Inclusive Kevin. Caring about the particulars, about the people, about the stories. And so you need this for what Kevin Starr is and is doing. His vision, I think, carries, of course, you can look at the 8 volumes and you can read those volumes as a coherent story. He wrote the one single volume of California, the yellow one, the Modern American Library. I think that shows that his vision of California, yes, it's not like the Bancroft sort of, patchwork. I mean, Kevin's got a vision. And it's relatively coherent, and it includes the religious, and it also has a secularity about it. Kevin's writing for everybody. He acknowledges that the world is changing and has changed. It ever is changing, and sometimes those are places where we don't want it to change to. So this is what he would talk about: the struggle for corrective action, which is present in his own work, and it reflected, I think, our book's explorations of both the religious and the non-religious contours of what he's doing, the political, as we've already mentioned, and how he exemplified this attunedness to a public, right, as we've already talked about. We analyze in the book his time, Peter Richardson does in the book, when he was under San Francisco Mayor Alioto at City Hall, and both a public librarian here, and then later for the state of California, which again, Mike Davis comments on, dear friend, as Kevin's understanding of his highest role as a civil servant. As a civil servant. We also get down, though, to, I think, what DJ Waldy calls, a dear friend and quintessential LA interpreter, where Don talks about the DJ Waldy's work in his book Holy Land, the Sacred Ordinary, which I think is something that Kevin also it's suggestive of what Kevin was trying to construct, which means at times both reckoning with Kevin's own approach in ways that it might be modified as he changes his mind, right? Which it's said, that the only often empirical evidence one has to demonstrate that one has a mind is if you change it from time to time. Now, this is Kevin, ever learning, ever reading, ever engaging, and not just the reading, but also the writing to try to see this place and to serve others to help us to better see. Right, as Anne had mentioned, sort of coming in, grabbing his novel shortly after arriving. Which is a strange novel, Land's End. He did say one time at Green Apple Books that everybody should write a failed novel at least once. I bought a copy too, Anne. So a little bit later, but so then our book is really this attempt to not only sort of locate Kevin among the disciplines. And it is an academic book. And I do hope you, before you do leave, that you will pick up a copy or at least take the discounted version. But it is a little bit steep price, and I wish they would have brought that down a little bit. But Kevin is, of course, in the book talking about. He leads off the first chapter after the foreword by the nation's top historian, Anthea Hartig, used to be the director of the California Historical Society, and of course now is the director of the Smithsonian Museum of American History. Anthea locates Kevin there, and then Kevin comes in and says, this is how we ought to be looking at California going forward. He gave one of his final essays, and so we managed to publish the chapter posthumously, when he really gets into how you study the fragments of California and trust what you see. Trust the California you know. And how about, again, the particulars? How about California as an Asian place? I'm just staying at Hotel Triton, and of course you can't not think about that in light of the Dragon Gate and Chinatown, walking through there yesterday, but all the way up and down on the Pacific, this Asian place. And Starr's own chapter is followed by one that I write that recasts his vision as a distinctly Catholic vision, including what it means for his own past and his present and future, with implications for his methodology. After this is where you get Peter Richardson's chapter that examines, as we've mentioned, Kevin's writings in the Hearst's San Francisco Examiner from 1976 to 1983. Which gives maybe some instances of Kevin as a bit more reductionist than he became later, and certainly with his California Dream volumes and in the latter writings. We get these other chapters in the book, though, that talk about Kevin's grappling with sin, how he uses Christology to do this. Again, a sort of theological reckoning with these. Some of the volumes do this particularly well. We detail these in the book, as well as one of Kevin's former teaching assistants at USC, Megan Kendrick, who addresses Kevin's approach both to the natural and built environment. One of Starr's own, what he said, admitted weaknesses in his account of California life, to really not address the environment as he might have. And he, in one of this, in this particular chapter by Megan Kendrick, who teaches at Pepperdine University, she was pretty close with Kevin. She manages to find one of Kevin's stories about spending time as a teenager in Yosemite, and sort of what that meant for him to engage the natural place, but never really got around to do it like he would have liked to, engaging the land. But still, what we do have, and Megan, I think, minds it beautifully, shows his admiration not just for the natural landscape, but for what Californians built, which in Starr's eloquence can hardly be separated from religious sentiments and descriptions. And yet, even amidst all these things, reckonings loom. He sees not only the hopeful features of California, what it is, what has been built, but what reckonings need to be made with California in order to exemplify this struggle for corrective action, which is to say, judgment looms and justice cries out and rings out with demands that beg reconciliation for those whom the dream has failed, which amid the troubles find ground for what Kevin Starr called, again, this struggle for corrective action. So we have one of the final chapters in the book by sociologist Sid Martinez at University of San Diego and Thomas Reifer, who give their sociological analysis as this beautiful chapter that incorporates critical insights from Carey McWilliams, as well as Octavia Butler, as well as Mike Davis, for analyzing California's promises and what they invoke from both history and the memory, as well as the theological imagination. So we might see, I think then how this follows into the final chapter by the late Mike Davis, geographer, historian. Of course, Mike they didn't give Mike the PhD at UCLA for his book City of Quartz. And possibly because Mike told the story as he did, as critical as he did. I've asked some urbanists, why didn't UCLA give, we did this nice conference for Mike after he died, and he really wanted to give his chapter in this book. In fact, he went on hospice, and I said, hey, Mike, I know you want to be a part of this book. And I'm sorry, I just lost my father to cancer 2 years prior, and I live in Long Beach. I said, Mike, I know you want to be a part of this book. I'm sorry it didn't happen. We couldn't pull it together. He says, well, I have some thoughts. Why don't you come down? And so we spent a couple hours together working through this, and that became the final chapter. Mike wanted to say some things about Kevin and their relationship. They're often sort of juxtaposed as sort of your kind of, your conservative from elite genealogy with Mike Davis, sort of the sort of bruiser or Marxist organizer, and they deeply loved each other. And the chapter is a beautiful, moving account, I think, of what you get really with not just what Mike did there, but what you also get in Kevin's writings with this. You remember at the gubernatorial, the last one, I guess we've got another one coming up, the recall, Gray Davis. Arnold Schwarzenegger comes in. Arnold, grateful for his endorsement of the book. But Kevin wrote it was a very heated and contested election, and a difficult time in California after the rolling blackouts. What was happening when the boys of Texas ate the boys from California's lunch, it was said. And Kevin wrote this op-ed in the LA Times called Fuse It or Lose It. It was about the need to come together amid our divisions. And I think this book tries to show how these leading figures and Kevin's vision was this inclusive, beautiful vision of coming together to address our challenges, even amid our differences. So again, these key themes, I think, that are massively important for what we're looking at: particularity, radical inclusivity, and generosity. Shows, I think, what we try to do by developing Kevin's own, an understanding of Kevin's methodological framing, as well as the various threads of theological logic. It wasn't really explicit in what Kevin's doing. It's kind of underneath, and yet emerges at important times. He's drawing from this toolkit as a Catholic. I don't think he was an Andy Warhol daily Catholic, but he was at Mass enough and took his faith very seriously. It's in the literature. And yet this then found him in the midst of this secular place, counterculturally living the experienced dream. And I almost, in an ode to Kevin, wore a bow tie, but today, and I often do, but I wore a double-breasted suit instead, which is still, I think, as a means of exhibiting self-control in order to find oneself. I think part of anymore countercultural response to the world. I think this is what Kevin was doing. And in this, mentioned the interview that I gave, and Kevin gave it to me in 2016, shortly before he died. It was the last interview he gave. And of course, this is his first chapter in the book, the last chapter that he got, the 2 volumes on Catholicism in the Americas that he's published posthumously. But I think this is final chapter until the critical works come out of Kevin, with the currently 114 boxes that have been cataloged and 400 more to go. But from this interview that Kevin gave to me, and I was, a young editor of Boone, California with University of California Press, and he responded again. He was always kind and generous to me. And when he expressed his growing concerns over the growing divide between the very wealthy and the very poor, as well as the waning of the middle class, I think this also, left me a sense of what, in a brief exchange I had with Sheila as COVID was hitting. Of course, we dedicate the book to Sheila Starr. who's done more for us in understanding California than perhaps anybody alive. And I said, Sheila, it'd be wonderful if Kevin were here. And I said, what would you think about the pandemic? And I did look at sort of how he wrote about the Spanish flu, and it's not really much a century ago. But she shared with me this, and it's in the volume, so I share it with you. She said, Kevin would have had some very deep thoughts about this. She says, my guess, of course, no, but my guess is that he would say we have a chance as a country and state, you would think, to come to know one another, to work hand in hand with one another, to respect one another, and to build anew. She goes on to say, I wonder if he might also say that it's a watershed for the Republic because it's the moment when we start to build back into our economy the protections for workers we once had when unions were strong in America. Kevin was, she said, a very pro working person, working men and women, and liked the writings of an advisor to Roosevelt, Father John Ryan, the economist, pulled out of the American Eugenics Society in the 30s, beating the Catholics out of that. Which takes me back to the final point for this talk that you have with Kevin, California's Catholic historian, which is, you think about kind of where historians have tried to locate Kevin Starr. I think smaller-minded historians or other cultural interpreters today might suggest that after his untimely death and the events of 2020, that we may be now beyond Kevin Starr. But I think the structure of our volume allows for a take on Starr's complicated interpretation of the colonialist experiment, especially with the Catholic dimension, and his understanding of race and sin and spirituality that we deal with in the book in ways that critical inquiry would welcome. And Starr also, as we've mentioned, has changed his mind about things from time to time. And so reckoning with his own legacy and that of California's very origins as an American state on the question of what happened with the California natives as well, we get Kevin's lament and admission that, of course, in absolute moral terms, what happened in early gold rush California with the genocide. In absolute moral terms, he says, the loss of one single Indian child, much less the near total destruction of an entire people, is not worth an affirming view of the gold rush in absolute moral terms. Nor is it worth an affirming view as we consider the destruction of the environment. And yet we can't go back. We can't go back. So how do we move forward, he asks. And so with this book, we leave the task of the ongoing reckoning, both of the current and subsequent generations of interpreters of California. And for the sake of this volume, we leave it to you. We leave it to your children. We leave it to your grandchildren and mine. For the sake of what we seek to do, both critically engaging, not just California, and of course, as we try to do in this volume, you'll take out and enjoy and let me know how you find our work as we are starting this conversation, that we would not only critically engage with California and Kevin Starr's vision of this complicated place, but that we would find ourselves living in that story for the sake of a better future. Thank you very much.
Time for a couple of questions.
Well, let me jump in right away.
Yes, please.
I'm a graduate of USF.
Yes.
About 10 years, 7 years, 8 years after Kevin. So 2 cohorts were
Yeah, of students.
publishing.
Yeah.
It was 4 years old. And he had an ongoing chat with Kevin. Kevin said, well, I came out of USF, I was in ROTC. My friend Paul was a conscientious objector. I actually ended up breaking ROTC at USF because they refused to be involved. Kevin had this interesting idea. And Paul was a great friend. They were all good. They were down in Los Angeles. They would talk. They had a conversation in Paris about the various things you're talking about. You cannot forget that Kevin Starr was a San Francisco Irish. It's a difficult story. It's complicated. Now, by the way, Sheila is a really elegant woman, but she went to Manhattan, New York. She's not a San Francisco. She was raised in Manhattan, and she's a wonderful lady. I don't know her as well as you do. Kevin Starr was a San Francisco. But the time he went to USF, it had started to dramatically improve. The University of San Francisco teachers. There were marvelous people coming on the faculty. We never had a chance to talk about some of the people. But there were wonderful people coming through that university. Monsignor Ellis was probably the preeminent American historian of Catholicism. I think Kevin met, and then there were many other people. And Kevin took, the interesting thing Kevin admits, I just looked at it again today. When he went back to Harvard, he did English at USF as I did, as Paul mentioned this. When he went back to Harvard, that's where he said, I discovered California. He went to the Houghton Library.
Yeah.
And it impressed. Now, this could be said to be like out of Walter Benjamin. He leaves to goes to a strange place, and all of a sudden California means something. And he therefore then became very interested. And he isn't the kind of English lover. I mean, it's not the way the historians do it.
American literature.
Yeah, literature. And he was literary. And that first book, Land's End, is astonishing. It's bifurcated. You know, it's about a time then and a time now.
Yeah.
And it's like Kevin is this is already from the city librarian. And then the last book, and by the way, are both of those volumes now published? I only have the first one.
Both of the, by St. Ignatius Press, both of the posthumous volumes
So-
are published.
And am I mistaken? I think he was with the Jesuits for a brief period of time.
You know, yeah. Okay, so who's
He went to seminary briefly.
yeah. Well, no, the question of what kind of Catholic was Kevin? If
Well,
that's
because of that.
if that's the question,
He graduated the year of the Vatican Council.
right?
There, I started high school the year of the Vatican. That had something to do with
So the bibliography. Thank you. Tell me your name again.
John.
Thank you, John. This is a great comment, and I think a great area of inquiry. You know, it's interesting. When we got this volume going and I had the first gathering at the Mechanics Institute, Father Paul Fitzgerald come along to talk about Kevin's relationship with USF. Right, following Hinkle, of course, as an editor, and I think there is a lot to kind of or discovering a new California from Harvard. Right, looking back at this place, and it goes through Josiah Royce and how he tells the story. But then you get Kevin. I mean, the orphanage he was in was not a Jesuit orphanage.
No.
And he also took a degree with the Dominicans, or not a degree. I think he had a fellowship, but I don't think it was a formal degree in Berkeley. And so, you know, I would love to see a serious conversation among Catholic theologians, Catholic historians about where one might locate Kevin, especially because he would throw around terms like, you know, I remember him saying at the talk that he gave us and wrote copious notes that he understood himself to be this a post-Augustinian Catholic. And he didn't have a lot of time for Vatican II, sort of shortening of the sermons and these kinds of things. And yet, I mean, this is also where you find him not only engaging, of course, aware of a number of contemporary Catholic thinkers, people like Charles Taylor, who he also found unintelligible as a philosopher and thinker. So Kevin wanted. It'd be interesting to find out, what, and of course Sheila would know, and others, how did his own sort of Catholic imagination? He did give a talk at a conference at USC on the Catholic literary imagination just a couple years before he died. I think that might have been 2016. And yeah, I think that's a conversation, a serious one that is waiting to happen about how Kevin sits particularly within Roman Catholicism in a contemporary moment. So, and of course we have the volumes, but not just that. When you look at the bibliography, Kevin wrote a lot about the San Francisco diocese. He published a lot of works. And of course, once you get back into the columns, an Examiner. Now that's, again, early Kevin, sort of political. That's pre-supervisory run. that he barely lost. And then before he goes and takes the position at USC, and of course before he becomes state librarian. But Kevin's own Catholicism is a massively significant part of his consciousness and of his scholarship, it seems like to me, and of his research and what he chooses to find and what he chooses to ignore. Mike Davis also makes this point too, having been, of course, raised Welsh Irish and a disaffected Catholic. And when I spent the time with Mike, whose birthday is 1 week before St. Patrick's Day, so Mike, rest in peace. He wore the green shirt with the, of course, the clover saying unrepentant Irish bastard is what Mike had there, which, I think is to say that there's a lot of room for finding how Kevin found himself in both this counter-Reformation kind of Catholicism that's constantly, and Mike made the point that, Kevin believed in the goodness of humanity, which I think is what he probably meant by post-Augustinian Catholic.
Thank you. And I think there's many more conversations in that order. And some of what you talked about reminded me of another Californian, call him maybe a Catholic governor named Jerry Brown, who speaks about the people of California in many ways and many times similarly to me, to Kevin Starr's embrace of the people of California. It's you can't explain it to other people, and you don't need to explain it to Californians. Is my thought for the evening, and I want to thank you again, Jason Sexton, for your and to all of you for attending this program. Wonderfully fascinating, I think. And we invite you to join us for our next program, April 8th at 5 p.m. The title is California and Reframing the Making of the Modern U.S. West. So it's dynamic everywhere. It's a virtual presentation by the author and professor of history at Duke University, Sarah Deutsch. You can register for this event online at BCC Books, or you can use the link in the weekly programs or the emails you may be receiving from the book club. So thank you again, Jason. And thank you all for joining us. Have a wonderful evening. Take care.